Welcome back, everyone, to the Elmore Leonard podcast. This is Judd, here with Alex.
Yeah, great to be back, Judd.
Today we are talking about Hombre. It's going to be our first Western. The Western genre was where Elmore really got his start. Short stories at first, and then novels, and I think Hombre is one of the best. Written in 1961.
This was his fifth novel. It is his only novel told in the first person, so it's unique in that area.
There's a lot of unique things about that because there's some mystery there as to what exactly is this conversation that I still wonder about. It was turned into a film a few years later, I believe 1967, starring the late great Paul Newman. Also, the movie was also called Hombre, and it was directed by Martin Ritt, who was a fantastic studio director in the heyday of studio films. Might be best known for directing another Paul Newman classic, Judd.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Judd shares more than just the director and the star with Hombre. It also shares screenwriters, the husband-wife duo who wrote the screenplay for Judd, which was an adaptation of a Larry McMurtry novel. They wrote the adaptation for Hombre, and as well as the cinematographer James Wong Howe. Beautiful cinematography in Judd, which I believe won the Academy Award. And James Wong Howe, was one of those old school legendary cinematographers. He filmed The Thin Man, the Dashiell Hammett book, and he did The Sweet Smell of Success. And he did John Frankenheimer's Second. So it's really like varied, interesting movies that he did. And Hombre was one of his last ones.
Hombre is beautifully shot, and it's a very, very good movie. There are some differences between the movie and the book.
And they did have some production problems too, which is interesting. I mean, to see or to imagine, it's one of those Westerns where they went to go film it and there's just like dust storms and, like things are breaking. The director almost gets crushed by a giant light.
These things happen, especially in the 60s. Now, there are some really interesting things that happen in this book as well as the film, but I think they're a little bit more pronounced in the book.
Yes.
So there may be some spoilers, but the book came out over 60 years ago, so you should be well warned. But
we can recommend that you read it as well.
Yeah, you should definitely read this one. It's a great book. It's a great book, and
it doesn't have Elmore's like trademark style, but I think on its own, it certainly justifies a read. I think of it almost as like if this book came out in 1961 and was like a massive hit, then I wonder what Elmore's writing career would have been. Like if he had taken this as the blueprint versus the crime novels that he's now known for. Because I think this book is very effective and it's great in its own right, but it's quite different.
It definitely is. It's interesting, and once we've talked about it a little bit more, there's some similarities between Hombre and some later books, and there's one in particular that shares some very cool things that I got a kick out of, and we can explore that a little bit later. Real quick, Alex. So
sure.
This book came out in 61, and I probably should know this as one of the hosts of the Elmore Leonard podcast, but was this about the time that after this book, is this sort of when he took a break?
Yes. This was his fifth book, and right after this, I think it was about a 5-year period, which coincided weirdly with Elmore saying, like, now I'm finally going to quit the advertising job and do writing full time. And then, of course, kind of life took over. Too many things were happening. Yeah. He had to take freelance work, and it took up too much of his time. But the film version of Hombre got picked up near the end of this 5-year period, which gave him a check, which basically made it so that he could hunker down and do writing full time again. And that's it's kind of interesting that, the Hombre marks the beginning of his 5-year period, his only 5-year period without writing, and then it marks the end with the film version, the money coming through.
So even if the movie does take some liberties, it worked out in the end, and got our man back on track. Another thing just worth pointing out, I think, is something that's been attributed to Elmore was he talks about how long it takes to get good as a writer, as a novelist, and he said about 1 million words. was what it took to get you there. And 5 books is sort of what it takes. And this is his 5th novel. Now, he had written a lot of short
20
stories
20 short stories
beforehand.
or something, yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting that he got this far and then takes a break. But then when he comes back, some really, really interesting things are happening for him.
And I think his earlier books have their moments, but this is the first one to me that is like a full, complete book. That I think from start to finish is entertaining. It's frequently funny. It has elements of, there's a big bag of money.
There's great dialogue.
Exactly. The lines are great.
So I do feel, and for the purposes of this, we sort of talked about some of our favorite lines. Because it is told in first person, I do include some of the narration. There's a couple of narrated lines that I think are, there's a couple
the
lines
voice of the narrator is so distinct in this one. I know Elmore kind of chafed at the Dickens of Detroit moniker for himself. He didn't think of himself as writing like Dickens, but if any of his books have Dickens aspects, I think this almost sounds like it would be, Pip from Great Expectations or something, like the thoughts and asides and the figure that one out, the little jokes he said.
No, the narrator does a good job. So Hombre tells the story. Let us dive in here. We are in Arizona,
1884.
1884. So the railroad is starting to take over, and that's sort of the framing of how this story takes place. There's a stagecoach line that is shutting down, and
because of the stagecoach shutting down, this little town is basically becoming obsolete. So we have all these different characters who are trying to get out of town for different reasons.
So we meet a handful of people right away. And this is all through the eyes of our narrator, Carl, is telling us this story. And it's sort of interesting because first there's a letter at the beginning of the book,
which is kind of a prologue, which is one of the things that Elmore warns against. And I do appreciate in that prologue, Carl says, if there's anything anybody wants to skip, like innermost thoughts, just go ahead, which is pretty close to one of Elmore's rules down the line.
No, so there's a letter, and then there's this book, which is telling the rest of the story. And I don't know exactly, he does mention towards the end of it that there were some certain accounts in newspapers that were accurate, but really just one, and that was written in an hour. And he took 3 months to write this.
And he breaks the fourth wall a couple times. He says, like, could you imagine that? Or
oh yeah,
he says things like that. Or I didn't know that I would be writing this when this happened. Or I would have done this. Yeah.
Right. So we meet our main character, John Russell, would be his English name, but he's also referred to as Hombre, which is sort of, and we learned why he got this nickname, a shorter version of his nickname, Tres Hombres. He was in a situation, and he fought like 3 men. And for the reader, Tres Hombres, 3 men, also represents John Russell's very unique background. He's part white, part Mexican. He lived and lives with the Apache, so he embodies the struggle between the 3 groups. Tres Hombres, 3 men, represented 1 man. Elmore wrote about the Apache a lot in his westerns. They were incredibly fierce warriors and fighters, fending off the Spanish, then the Mexicans, and finally Americans for centuries since the 1500s. I have studied a little bit of this history, and there are a lot of people who think that part of why Mexico ceded so much of the western U.S., including California, at the end of the Mexican-American War in the late 1840s, was so they wouldn't have to deal with the Apache anymore. They were, like I said, skilled fighters, often brutal, and they were obviously treated brutally, particularly, as we'll learn later, by the people who were supposed to be helping them. John Russell was actually born in a Mexican village, kidnapped by the Apache, and lived with them for several years. We'll learn more about that later. But when we first meet him, he is working with 2 other Apache. They have a business dealing with wild horses, capturing wild horses, and they appear to be very close friends, if not family members.
He identifies with the Apaches much more than the white people,
and this makes him really difficult to. So much of this book is which box are we putting him in, and we have at this time we have Mexicans represented, we have white people represented, and we have Apaches represented through John.
But they appear to be like the lowest on the social hierarchy, according to the white settlers. Because Mr. Mendez is a local businessman. He's, they work with him and trade with him, but when they find out the truth about John Russell's Apache ties, they think of him as kind of less than them.
100%. So at the time, there was this is actually something that I really wanted the book, whenever Elmore does, I think really all of his books have so much really interesting historical context to them. Some of it I'm aware of, but some of it I'm not at all. And so when there is something that I have no idea what it is, and he sort of mentions it, in this case, I'm talking about the Apache police, which I don't really know what that is or what that was, but it was essentially a police force on the reservation of San Carlos, which will come into play. And that's where he lived, and that's how he is sort of identified as being Apache, because only Apache could be Apache police.
No, I'm with you. I like that they just gave context clues that reveals all, even though I have no idea what that meant, but we could figure it out.
But he's just opening up a door, and we can take the time later on to walk through it. We're already jumping ahead.
True,
because we've got to get ourselves on this damn stagecoach to begin with. So there's a lot of people, for a lot of reasons, who are trying to get out of town. It's a little different in the movie. We'll get to that later on. But in the book, we have a handful of people who are trying to leave. It really is started because there's a very wealthy couple who really have to get out of town, and it doesn't become clear why until later, but they have to go, and they're willing to pay extra to go that night. And
that's Dr. Favor and his younger wife, Mrs. Favor.
And let me just point out Dr. Alex Favor.
That's right.
Is it possible that he was named after you?
No, I wasn't around yet, Judd.
All right. Well, we needed to clear that up. There's a lot of chatter online about that. So we have Dr. Alex Favors and Mrs. Audra Favors. They're very wealthy. They're very well-to-do, and they pay for all sorts of extra things to make sure that no one gets in trouble for sending out a stagecoach. There's supposed to be our driver, Mendez. There's our narrator, who doesn't have a job anymore, so he's got to leave town. There is John Russell, he's
coming into an inheritance. I think he's been gifted a plot of land that he's going to turn around and sell,
and a house. So after being kidnapped by the Apache and living with them for a few years, he was rescued and was adopted by a man named James Russell. And that is who he lives with for a few years. But then, when he's about 15 or 16, he goes back to live with the Apache again.
And it's kind of gone over pretty fast. We don't know exactly his relationship with James Russell, but James Russell gave him the name Russell, and in his will left him some stuff. So we assume it's a decent relationship, but it's not mentioned really in the book.
Well, and this is one of the things about the book, which is why the narrator comes in pretty handy, is because John Russell doesn't say a whole heck of a lot. There's so much time spent trying to figure out what he's thinking, and then even when he does speak, trying to understand what it is that he meant. I think it works really well. I think that he is a really, really interesting character in both, I would say, both the movie and the book, although I think it works a little bit better in the book because we have some distance from him the entire time, and it just anytime he says something, anytime he does something, you're really, really paying attention.
And I think in the book he's younger. He's supposed to be 21 years old, where every now and then the narrator remarks that he's just a young guy, but he acts so mature and confident and in charge. Which, when it's Paul Newman, I'd listen to him too, but
for sure. But also, no one is really understanding why he's making the decisions he's making throughout this adventure that we're about to embark on. So Russell has to get out of town, and we have the Favors, we have Carl, our narrator, we have Henry Mendez, our driver, and sort of the manager of this stagecoach, who's making I think they remark that he's making a month's salary in 3 days or something, so it's really worthwhile to him. And
we have the McLaren girl, who has ties to the Apaches as well.
Carl tells us she was kidnapped, and she, for at least a month, was held captive by the Apache. We have a soldier who is about to quit and get a job in a mine and then get married, who wants to leave, but he does not leave because this jerk named Frank Braden comes to the stagecoach office station. I'm not sure, terminal. I'm not sure where the depot.
And he bullies the guy out of the ticket.
And he tries to do it on John Russell. It doesn't work. And then he does it on this soldier. And I think you're sort of thinking, oh, well, this is the point in most Western stories where the mysterious stranger who doesn't want any trouble will get involved. But he doesn't. And he does nothing as this poor guy is bullied out of his ticket. He paid for the ticket. Braden doesn't even give him any more for it. He just takes this ticket, takes the last seat available on this stagecoach, and everyone is taken aback because they see Russell as someone who could have done something but has chosen not to. But they decide, well, it's the only coach. Let's get going. They hop on. Braden is a bit of a dick. I think we could say it, but it's interesting because he's acting in a way, but he's a white guy, and Russell they're not quite sure about. The McLaren girl, we're also we do learn later on her name is Catherine, so I'm just going to call her Catherine.
I thought it was Kathleen.
Kathleen McLaren, who
similar to Russell. She was abducted by the Apaches and spent some time with them against her will.
Right. And we first get a sense of how people feel about the Apache from Mrs. Favor. And she's asking Kathleen about what it was like and what must have happened. And nothing impolite is said, but it's insinuated. And Kathleen, we learn very quickly from what Carl is saying and what Carl is telling us about her, she's not afraid of anybody. And she will speak her mind, whether it's this rich woman who is essentially bankrolling this journey or whoever it might be. And she's a fantastic character. I really enjoyed her. I think she was a lot of fun. And I don't know why she wasn't in the movie. I thought she would have been fantastic.
I mean, the only reason I can think is because they wanted to give Paul Newman a bit of a love story or a love interest. They'd done a similar thing with Judd, because the book Judd, what's her name, Patricia Neal character is completely different in the book, and there's no kind of back and forth with the Judd character. So I think they were thinking, if we just even if doesn't end in a romance like Judd doesn't, we can have some romantic tension or something. So I think that was the idea, but as you're saying, they got rid of like one of the best characters. She doesn't appear in the movie at all. The sort of the equivalent, even though the movie doesn't have a narrator, the stand-in for Carl has a wife. And even Carl himself is way different, and he has a different name. He's Billy Lee something. There is a new character in the film. Her name is Jessie. I actually got a kick out of her, and I thought that they had some fun moments between them. A lot of the conversations between Jessie and John Russell are in the book in different places, and they certainly don't go on as much. There's a little bit of tension, sexual tension, I guess, between Paul
I just
Newman's
couldn't
character
stand the actress's accent. Her kind of put on old timey. I found it quite grating. I really did find it one of the biggest marks against the movie.
I mean, I would say she does feel like. I mean, that movie does come around at an interesting time. We do have this shift at about that time from away from more presentational, more performative, more quote unquote theatrical acting, and more sort of naturalistic film acting, which is also obviously naturalistic acting is also just fine on the stage.
And the storylines got more complex. It's like the kind of the birth of the revisionist westerns where
it tries to tackle the racism and the classism,
right. Well, there's
like starvation and murder, and those westerns all tackle heavy themes, and Hombre does get roped into that just because of the kind of racism attitude that the people have towards John Russell.
I think there's two movies, two westerns that are that for me I was thinking about throughout watching Hombre, because I'd seen both of these more recently since when I'd last seen Hombre. The first is The Searchers, which is sort of the classic John Ford, John Wayne. I mean, it still is one of the best westerns I think ever made. And also The Outlaw Josie Wales, which is a Clint Eastwood movie. And they're all about 10 years apart. So The Searchers came out, I think, in late 50s. And then we have...
And The Searchers does have a connection to Hombre in that the character that Natalie Wood plays, who is abducted by the natives.
Exactly.
They're all based mostly in a historical woman named Cynthia Ann Parker, who was abducted by the Comanche Indians when she was 9 years old. Her family lived in Texas, pretty far away from other settlers. They got raided, and she got kidnapped along with her brother. But that kind of thing happened all the time. But what makes her case unique, and it was very famous in America and especially in the West, was that she then spent most of her life with the Native Americans. She had multiple children with a Native American. Her oldest son ended up becoming a chief. He was like the last great war chief of the Comanches. But then when I think she was with the Comanches for 25 years, when she got rescued, with quotes, back to white civilization, she escaped. And that's what fascinated people, was that, this woman could spend time with these savages and want to go back. Like, how could this happen? So I think that is the locus point of The Searchers, or, plenty of movies, or, Last of the Mohicans is closer to Hombre, and that it has, in the film version, we have, Natty Bumppo, who's played by Daniel Day-Lewis, who is raised by Native Americans. And it's, it's more of like an honest portrayal of like the, dignity and honor. But I think all of these stories kind of go back into that like fascination that like earlier America had with the customs. Because most of the time people would get abducted and they wouldn't, they would have no idea what would happen, which is, when they were asking Kathleen in Hombre, the whole coach is trying to find out more information. And, she tells them some of the stuff that happened, but a lot of it, it's like too traumatic, or, she doesn't want to get into it. And that is kind of like what happened throughout the West.
And I think it's actually one of the themes of the book is just, we have this idealized version of the West, and it pretty much sucked. And it was for most people, white or Apache, it sucked. And there's a line. It might be my favorite line. It might be my favorite line in the book that really underscores just like the difference between what we think of the West and what it must have been for the people who endured it, no matter where they were in society. Oh, just one last point on The Searchers was so much of people. We're talking almost 75 years ago. So if you haven't seen The Searchers, this is your spoiler alert. Part of what's happening in The Searchers is John Wayne has to go and essentially save Natalie Wood's character, who's been abducted. But there's sort of an understanding that, well, depending on what she went through, there might need to be essentially an honor killing. And because it was so terrible and it was so shameful, and that would be the humane thing to do. Of course, John Wayne cannot go through with that. He learns a few lessons along the way. But anyway, there's a really interesting connection, I thought, between the movie Hombre, The Searchers, as well as The Outlaw Josie Wales, and which I don't think is as good a movie as The Searchers, but it's a fun movie. It's definitely worth seeing if you're in the mood for a good Clint Eastwood Western. But let's get back to the actual book. So we've left town. Now, we neglected to mention there's a short scene that happens So they're on the way to the first stop is a place called Delgado's, which is on the way to where they're heading. And it's sort of a way station, sort of you could water your horses. Yeah, they had food, they had coffee, they had a bar. Earlier in the book, there's a scene there with John Russell and Henry Mendez, two of Russell's compatriots who are Apache. And two jerk cowboys show up, and they don't like that there's two Apache in their bar, and they start to mess with them.
Their names are Lamar Dean and Early. Early is not given any other name besides Early.
And they see the Apache. They start to mess with them. One of them
spilling their mezcal all over them, and just making fun of them.
And John Russell doesn't like this at all. And you get the sense that his two friends could take care of themselves, but they're not going to, for what it could mean and what it could result in. But John Russell steps in, and it is described this. It happens in the movie similar to how it happens in the book, where he waits for the guy to take a drink, and then he clocks him in the face with a rifle butt and smashes the glass against the guy's face, and essentially just says, "Hey, no more of that. Pay for your drink and get out." And they do. As you might suspect, we will meet these gentlemen later. So our carriage ride does stop off at Delgado's, and everyone gets out to stretch their legs. And at this point, people in the stagecoach have cottoned on that John Russell may not be a white man, even though he has these blue eyes that do stand out a little bit, because he was part of the Apache police. This makes him a little bit nervous, and it's Dr. Favor who goes and essentially says, "Hey, I'd like this guy to ride on top, not in with us." And there's a conversation there, which is an interesting conversation because
they seem to be kind of unanimous about it, though. Like you would hope that Carl, who's a decent dude, we know from hearing his thoughts on the matter,
like
or Kathleen, who's kind of the moral center of the book, that they would put up more of a fight or something. But it's pretty much just accepted. Like, nope, I guess he's Apache. He rides outside of the carriage.
Well, I got the sense that it was more Favor who wanted it, and no one. He wasn't really going to discuss it with anyone.
Yeah, certainly.
Ask for anybody's
but even
permission,
Mendez didn't give pushback.
Mendez doesn't. And Mendez is sort of, and you get where Mendez is coming from. What's interesting is John Russell actually offers to ride up front before, at the beginning of the ride. So he and Mendez can talk, and Mendez says, "We're not going to be able, you can't hear yourself think up there. We can't talk. Just sit in there and be a passenger, and it's fine." So it's almost like John Russell sees that this could be a problem.
But I think that's also part of the race commentary, because Mendez tries to convince Russell, like, you have this land and this house, you could live as a white person, like that. There's a major advantages to that this could change your life. So I think part of Russell saying, "I want to ride on top," he's like, "No, you don't have to. You can, you have the option of riding inside. You should take it."
But Mendez is, he's in the midst of making a fantastic payday here. And so he just wants to get the ride over with, and he just says, "Hey, let's not make a big thing of it. Come on with me." And
I think he's used to being kind of a second-class citizen in many ways. He's got to just to be a successful business owner, he just has to kind of put up with people.
Yeah. So he basically just says, "Look, man, it's only a day or so. It's not a big deal, and let's just get through it." And they have a mezcal and just kind of put it behind them, and they're as they're getting back to get on the road, we learned from Delgado that a couple other folks had been there that night, and even though they got there in the middle of the night, they weren't the first people to wake up the Delgado family. There were some other folks, and Favor's reaction is interesting in that he's very suspicious, and why he's so suspicious, it sort of gets your attention. And And it does make you think, well, what is he worried about? Might they be heading into some sort of an ambush, basically, is the concern. And because of that, they discuss, well, how about we change routes? And they decide, all right, well, we'll go a different way. We'll get there. It's going to be about it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other to get to where we need to be at the time that we need to be there. Sure, why not? We'll do it. And also, Favor is, again, he's paying for this whole thing, basically. So Mendez is inclined to go the way that Favor wants to go.
And we find out very soon that the two jerks from the previous Delgado scene are just minutes away from ambushing our carriage.
Well, yeah.
And Favor's nervousness starts to make sense when we find out that he has $12,000 of stolen money from his job as the Indian agent.
That is exactly right. So he was the guy in charge of essentially administering the reservation. And that meant buying food, collecting money to pay for the food. And, so one of the comments that's in both the book as well as the movie is that Mrs. Favor makes is about how the Apache there, one of the reasons she doesn't think of them as human is because they would eat a dog. And John Russell points out, well, you might too if you were that hungry. And as we learn pretty quickly, it's Dr. Favor who is responsible for them being so hungry because he has been essentially taking money, and instead of buying meat with it to feed the people living on the reservation, he's been just putting it in his pocket. And so no meat was showing up, and people were going hungry for a very long period of time. He was the Indian agent for years. So we have now been held up, and there's one more jerk who we've mentioned, and it's Frank Braden. He has a different name in the movie. I don't know why, because I think Frank Braden is a pretty good
They thought Frank
name.
wasn't a bad guy enough name, so they came up with Cicero Grimes, which is like a mustache twirling,
Yeah.
He could only be a supervillain.
I really enjoy that the actor who played Grimes, but he would have done a good job as Frank Braden as well. He would have, no matter what he would have named,
totally.
No matter what he was named, he would have been someone you wanted to see get got. And so we've got 4 gunmen holding them up. So we've got 4 gunmen.
So it's the 3 we've mentioned plus a 4th who is referred to as the Mexican.
So they hold them up, and they are taking the money from Dr. Favor. They're finding out who's got guns and where are these guns. And, Russell has a pistol. They take that. They throw that in the woods. Favor has a gun. They take that. They're not in the woods, but they take it and throw it into the dirt.
The brush.
The brush, thank you. They take the money. A couple of our bad guys ride off.
But not before they take Mrs. Favor with them.
They take one more thing, Mrs. Favor. And Mrs. Favor has been flirting just a tiny bit from Carl's perspective with Frank Braden in the car, in the stagecoach. And I was left wondering a little bit how exactly, clearly, so looking back on it now, Braden he had to get on this stagecoach in order to be a part of this heist. How did he know that Favor, A, had the money, and B, was going to be on the heist? Was there a relationship with Mrs. Favor before?
I mean, it's certainly never stated. I think it was just, they got on his tail. They knew he was heading out of town. They suspected he stole the money. They had information. We just don't know how.
We don't know how, but I was thinking at first that maybe she was being kidnapped, not just so terrible things could happen, but because she was in on it. So I was thinking about that a little bit, but they take her, and Frank rides off with her.
Lamar Dean sticks around.
And what's interesting is Lamar actually has the money, but he sticks around, and what they realize, far too late for Lamar, is that they did not grab John Russell's rifle. So Lamar really should have remembered that John Russell had a rifle because he got hit in the mouth with it, but he didn't. And John Russell, basically, if you listen to our podcast about swag, where the thief gets held up, that's what happens. John Russell takes him out, gets the money back, but now they have to figure out what to do because they don't have water. They don't have as many horses as they used to. No one knows what to do, but it's clear. One of the cool things, and this is both in the movie and it's in the book, is Russell takes off his boots and he puts on his moccasins.
But they are Apache moccasins that they go up to the knee. They're tall and different than the ones you're used to seeing.
Not your typical moccasins. No. One thing we strive for here on the Elmore Leonard podcast is moccasin accuracy. So it is clear that he's going to do something. We don't know what.
And it's at this point that it transitions into kind of a survival Western, which if you've seen The Tall Tea or read the short story that inspired it, it's territory that Elmore has done before.
Exactly. So we've got Dr. Favor, Carl, Kathleen, Henry Mendez, and John Russell. And the only person who really knows how to handle themselves in this environment is John Russell, but he doesn't seem interested at all in helping them, guiding them, protecting them. He has a goal in mind, and he's going to go do it. And they try to talk to him, but he doesn't really respond, and they really don't have a choice but to just follow him and do their best.
And he takes the money for himself because it's stolen from his Indian brothers. Dr. Favor thinks it's his, but he doesn't stand a chance against Russell, so he gives him the money.
And they're just trying to keep up. They have some food, they have some water. They had when they had stopped earlier, they had left some water at the mine and never collected it. They probably didn't think they needed it, but they don't have much water left because I think it was early. But one of Braden's guys, essentially, he took some of their water and then he also destroyed their water bag, which, if you're going through the desert, this is a problem.
And John Russell instructs them all to not drink. He says, wait till night, otherwise you'll sweat it out.
And so they start to truck along. And what's really interesting, I think, is that there's so many opportunities in this book, and we see a little bit in the movie. There's so many opportunities for certain types of conversations to happen that would not happen in normal life when you're comfortable. But because of where they are and what they're being forced to think about and forced to do, there's some really big themes that start to come through here. What do people owe each other and why? And what are the things that keep people together and why? Some of these things, I think...
And who's deserving of grace, who decides these things. I would say there are a lot of Christian themes.
That's something I want to ask you about, because one of the things that we learned about Favor was that he's a doctor, but he's not a medical doctor. He is essentially, he's a doctor of divinity. He was a minister who just happened to get... or he claimed to be a minister.
I think, there's doubt about that. I think he's basically just a con man, and that's one of his cons, is that he's a doctor.
The place of religion and the place of faith, these are interesting questions, and so not too much time is spent on it, but it's just another example.
I do want to talk about this, but a little bit later. I have some points about the Christian aspects of the story, but I think it would be better served a little later.
We will plow ahead.
Right.
But I'm looking forward to those. Okay, so what to do? We're in the middle of, it's not a pure desert, but it's basically the desert.
I mean, there's cactuses, it's hot. Yeah, it's desert-like.
They are not where they want to be. They're not going to be safe, and they have the money. Now, so much of what we're reading is Carl describing his discussions with not John Russell, but everyone else, as they're trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. It takes a while. I mean, and because they are expecting to be chased, they're not going in a straight line. They are...
Well, they're sticking to dense passages. They're trying to stay in the shade so they don't get roasted and so they don't get seen. And they want to wait till nightfall. If there's any open land that they need to traverse, they want it to be so they can't be seen by these guys on horseback. So it's taking them longer to get back to where they want to go.
Right, and where they want to go and how they're going to get there, it's a big deal. Also, there's not a lot of discussion about rattlesnakes, but I was thinking about rattlesnakes a lot, so I was very concerned for them. But yeah, they eventually get back to, they reach a clearing, basically, and they don't know where they are, but they see that they're back at the mine, and Russell has taken them, or he's taken himself back to the mine, and they have managed to keep up.
So in the midst of them traversing this desert, Russell goes to scout, and while he's doing that, Favor steals the money and the remaining food and holds up the people with a gun, basically condemning them to death.
He steals the money he already stole.
Exactly, but without any water or food, like, they're dead. But right when he's about to take off, Russell comes back. Favor knows he can't beat him in a shoot-off, so he throws his gun down and gives up. But Russell says, "No, you're done. You can't walk with us. Get out of here." So they split up. So they walk all through the night, eventually finding their way back to the abandoned mine, which is where they stopped off briefly on their journey out.
So we get to the mine, and there's a little bit of, I wouldn't call it comfort, but there's a little bit of safety here. They are up high on a hill. They have a view of their surroundings. There's some small structures that they can take shelter in. They try to get some rest. They do. There's a nice moment where our friend Carl is starting to maybe have a little bit of a crush on Kathleen and wants to offer. He does offer her either his blanket or his jacket to keep her warm. She doesn't take it, and then he's embarrassed about sleeping under it, so he just uses it as a pillow. But it's a nice little touch between the two of them, and just sort of, I thought it was a nice moment. But so we've got Mendez, we've got Russell, we've got Kathleen, and we've got Carl, all somewhat safe and protected for the moment. They probably have a couple of hours of rest, but
because they want to go back and get the water that they've left, but Russell knows they shouldn't do it while it's still bright out, so they have to kill some time. And if they want to get the water, they got to wait till nightfall.
And he's very clear that, hey, we're trying to get away from these guys, and if they see that there's footprints going up and down, I was never a member of the Apache police. I was assuming that when they were at the mine before that they made footprints, but maybe it's been long enough for it to really be noticeable, or maybe they were just in a part of the mine that they hadn't been before, and so these guys could have noticed. But that's his reasoning, and it makes sense. So they're going to wait in order to do that. But as they're waiting, our good friend returns. Our good friend, Dr. Alex Favor, returns. This is a really interesting sequence for me, because this is when Kathleen, who up until then, she's been getting kind of pushed around by the Favors, and she hasn't been, treated well by either of them. But Dr. Favor comes back, and he's a mess, and he's been out in the heat and in the sun, and he's exhausted, and he finds an old well pump, and he starts pumping away and just collapses. There's no water coming out. It's a dead well. But
it becomes clear that he has forgotten about the leftover water bag. So there's a dilemma in the shack. All the rest of the people are watching him, thinking, if he doesn't get this water, he's going to die. But we don't know who could be around, so we don't necessarily want to warn him.
Well, Russell is very clear.
If we don't warn him, he's going to die.
Russell is very clear. Hey, why are you trying to save this guy? He tried to take your water. He would have given you up. He would have let you die from exposure and thirst. Why are you trying to save him? And it's Kathleen who has, from everything that we know, she is the person who is, she
has a good line about it. She says, because he would do such a thing, should we?
Right.
She says that to Russell, like, just because he's a piece of shit
doesn't mean we need to be. And this is a theme that comes up throughout. For me, like that this line of thinking of what exactly are our responsibilities to our fellow man? Where do we reach out and help, and where do we take care of ourselves first? These are all really interesting questions, and Elmore creates these situations where it makes total sense to talk. And I think in the midst of any intense environment, you have the opportunity to talk about stuff that you wouldn't at a water cooler. Russell, what's interesting about him is he's often saying the harshest thing, and he usually is proved to be correct in what he is saying.
It's frequently pragmatic, though. It's like, it's sometimes depressing, but it's like the reality of the situation.
That's exactly right. But Kathleen cannot bear with it, and so she decides to help him. And she defies Russell, who is clearly the toughest, deadliest person in the room. He's got the money, he's got guns, he's killed people. Kathleen doesn't care. And she knows that she's helping somebody out who would not have helped her, but there's just something about it that she has to do it. And so she does. Eventually brings Favor back to their little, I guess they're in an office or a sort of a utility room from the mine.
But it's as Russell suspected, all the bandits are waiting. They figured that they would come back to this mine, so they've now found out that all the people they've been chasing are right next to them.
They had tracked Favor. They followed Favor back. Favor, gets rescued. And so now they know not only where this bag of water is, but the money. It's $12,000, which it's a good chunk of money now. But $12,000 in 1884, it'd be like $13,000 today. It was an enormous amount. No, I'm kidding. It would have been enough to set somebody up for life. So it is certainly something that everybody there, it's certainly something, there's clearly people there who are willing to kill for it, and some people are willing to die for it because it's that much money. So.
It's an element too that, I think of this as kind of an older style Western, but the big bag of money that everyone's fighting over seems very much like one of Elmore's crime stories.
Who does it belong to, and who's got their hands on it? We're going to get there. There are some really, really cool similarities. So Russell was right. They have not just welcomed Favor back, but everybody else. Braden and the Mexican and Early and also Mrs. Favor. So glad that she's back. And, Braden's also a pragmatist. He's willing to make a deal. He's willing to let bygones be bygones. He just wants his money. So he offers a parlay, as they call it. He just wants to talk. And so he starts heading towards them. The entire time, though, John Russell's got his gun on him. And he's, they start having this conversation from afar.
He says, give us the money, we'll give you the woman back. This doesn't have to be so difficult. Of course, Russell doesn't believe him.
Yeah, Russell is very skeptical. Braden tries to make the case, hey, I can send somebody to go get food and water. You guys can't. And there's sort of an interesting conversation where Russell says, oh, so you're saying that you're going to kill us if we don't give you the money? And Braden says, no, I didn't actually use those words. He certainly implies that that's going to happen, but he doesn't actually say it. And Russell knows then that, he can't really deal with Braden.
But then he says one of the best lines. Russell says, I got a question. And then Braden says, ask it. And Russell says, how are you going to get down that hill? And then he opens fire on Braden, who starts falling down the hill. We know he gets hit at least once.
He is hurting. He is hurting. And there's a little bit of concern among let's just call them the civilians about, oh no, what's going to happen now? And now we've really made them mad. And Russell's very clear. Look, this guy's telling us we're not getting out of here. He's going to kill us. He can go do stuff. We don't have a choice here. We are cornered. And so we've just got to deal with it.
So yeah, Carl says that an hour passed and we have the Mexican bringing out Mrs. Favor, tied up with rope, and he ties her to the train tracks.
With the tracks.
And leaves her there.
Yeah. And this is actually something that's a lot more effective in the book than in the movie. It's very clear how dangerous this is in the book, that she's tied up, she's in the elements. They actually give us a time. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, so it's only going to get hotter for her, and she's out and she's exposed. In the movie, I mean, I tracked it. It's about 15 minutes of screen time that she's out there, and she's not doing well. She's certainly not enjoying it, but they make the case for how dangerous and how painful this would be to be out in the heat like that for an extended period of time. But Dr. Favor, doesn't seem to have much of a reaction to his wife being tied up.
Which Carl notes multiple times throughout the book that, he's not mentioned his missing wife, his kidnapped wife once.
Right. And the way even going back to the stagecoach, where he didn't seem to have any reaction at all when Braden was, whispering sweet nothings into her ear. Dr. Favor didn't seem to care so much. So she's out there. She is roasting in the sun.
She's going to die. Within a matter of hours, Mrs. Favor's going to die. So it sparks the kind of final desperate conversations in the shack about what they should do between Kathleen and Russell, mainly.
Between Kathleen and Russell, but the implication is that she is his wife, and he's doing nothing. So why are you taking it upon yourself again? And these are really good, really deep, really interesting questions. They don't fully get played out. I mean, it does become very clear where they each stand on it.
So now we've just got the woman down there, and they just have to decide what to do. They still know the Mexicans down there. They know that, Braden is still alive, but they don't know the extent to his injuries.
We don't know where Early is, though, although we do learn from the Mexican that Early had filled up his canteen mainly with whiskey, not water, and he did not think this was going to be such a hard journey, and so we don't know where he is.
Well, they say he's behind them. He's blocking the rear so that they're stuck in this mine shack.
As we're sitting there and everyone is trying to figure out what to do, the main voices at this point are Dr. Favor, Kathleen, Carl a little bit, although he's not actually saying so much, and John Russell, and they're trying to figure out what to do. This woman is going to, and I am not a doctor, I don't know if that would really kill you, but she's dehydrated. She probably hasn't eaten or had any water. I mean, the fact is, it's not that she just, had a full meal and is stuck outside. It's probably been 24, 36 hours that she's had any water. So this has been going on for a while. She's getting close to the point of, if not death, and the point of no return of being, severely hurt and injured. And every minute that ticks by, she's in more danger.
So Kathleen starts to hit a breaking point, though, where she says, we have to do something.
And at this point, we learn that they've been there for about 4 hours. So it's now 2 o'clock. And this is as hot as it's going to get, but it's brutal. And as you were saying, Alex, Kathleen does hit a breaking point. And they have to make their decisions. And it's at that moment where they're trying to figure out what exactly to do. We get the sense from Carl that Russell has already figured out what he's going to do. He gives Carl his rifle and basically says, I'm going to go down there, and he's got his pistol. He's going to go down there, and he takes a bag. It's not the bag of money. He gives Carl the money. And he takes a bag where they've been storing their leftover food. There's not much in there at this point. He's just going to take it down there and pretend that it's the money to go make this exchange. But he knows there is no exchange to have. And so at this point, the only way to really get out is to figure out the best way to shoot his way out. Braden and the Mexican and Early, they're all hidden, and they can't access them. So he decides he's going to go down there. But before he does, he gives Carl the money, he gives Carl his rifle, and he gives Kathleen his moccasins. He basically says, look, I'm going to go down there, and Russell is looking for the Mexican and Frank Braden, but this Early guy we know is out here somewhere. So Russell tells him, he gives him his rifle, and he tells him, if he touches his gun, you shoot him. And which leads to Carl's response, but, I said, in the back? And this is my favorite line, because Carl has been, and this to me is sort of like, it's the old question, or it's the old, what is an honorable way to kill somebody? You killed an unarmed man, or all this stuff, all these sort of cliches that we get from Westerns and how people lived back then. Carl has been through a hell of an ordeal, being shot at, being left for dead, and he's worried about this chivalrous notion of this guy who tried to kill me several times. I can't shoot him in the back. It would be, it just made me laugh. I thought it was so great. And Russell responds, "I'll ask if he'll turn around," which is, he's so laconic. It's a really, really funny line, but it's just played straight, and it's great. And Russell explains, "Look, you're going to take this money back to San Carlos, to the reservation. I'm going to go down there." And so this is the final showdown. So spoiler, this is your last spoiler alert, as Russell heads down the hill with the pistol being looked after by Carl.
Says he put his hat on straight and pulled down a little over his eyes, which is a common Elmore description. It's, Raylan Givens is always has his hat straight a little over his eyes. So we've got John Russell in this book, exactly the same.
He heads down, and Carl is probably not the first person that John Russell would have picked to watch his back.
It's all he's got.
Henry Mendez tried to help him and blew it earlier, and so all he's got is Carl. And he goes down, and our final shootout begins, but in the movie, we see it played out. And it's played out, and it's dramatic, and it's interesting, but there's something a little anticlimactic about it. In the book, we learn right away, after Carl has an exchange with John Russell about what to do, with the money, and what to do with the gun, and how to protect him. There's a little moment that I think plays really well because Kathleen now sees that, Russell is actually going to help this woman, and he hasn't totally lost his quote-unquote humanity. And they have a little exchange about, like, hey, maybe when things settle down, we'll spend some time together. Maybe they'll go out on a date, maybe something. And it's a really, really sweet moment right before Carl tells us that was the last time they would see John Russell alive.
It's a classic Elmore thing. Like, he would always say he doesn't write mysteries, but I feel like he often like actively undercuts that kind of thing where he's just like, I don't need to hold it over your head. Like, this is what happened. This is the plain language. Like, you should know this going in, which in a way it's more devastating just to hear about it like that, where you're like, what? You know what I mean? You're not expecting like a shootout to happen, or like to see like who's still standing at the end. He just tells you like, no, he dies.
Yeah, it's a gut punch. It's a gut punch, and it's something, when it's done really well. Another great example of this is both the book and the movie, No Country for Old Men, where the exact same thing happens to Llewellyn, and played by Josh Brolin in the movie, where it just happens, and it sucks. We learn ultimately how it went down. We learn he shot and killed both Braden and the Mexican. Help me out. Does Carl get early, or does he get all three?
Early escapes. They say they never see him again. And to me, it's an interesting name because in Gunfights, you have a Brendan Early, Captain Early. But I do not believe it's the same guy. I don't think the dates would line up. It could be a relative or something. Well, I'll keep a lookout if there's any connection to this Early, but it's the same name.
No, it's brutal, and it gets worse. So they do insist on bringing John Russell back to Sweet Mary, the name of the town, to bury him and give him a proper burial. But the money does not end up going back to the reservation. It was returned it was given to a U.S. Marshal. And maybe the who knows what happened to it, but all the folks at the San Carlos Reservation did not get the proceeds. They did not get the money that should have gone to them to take care of them. And we end on a rough note. This is not as fun as the end of Rum Punch, or as funny as the end of Swag, but it's a hell of a book.
I do find it interesting too that sometimes I think Elmore is accused in a certain way of being like a commercial writer. He's writing like popular fiction, but a lot of these endings and even the subject matter is like can be pretty heavy. So I find it like it's at odds with with certain people's understanding of his reputation. But the thing I wanted to talk about in relation to like kind of Christianity with this book was Elmore referred to John Russell as a Christ-like figure. And it's a reading of the book that I think you could read it and, not think of the kind of symbolism and fully enjoy it. But there are some definite kind of, I feel like, very deliberate things, such as John Russell dying with, next to two criminals, which is kind of how, Jesus was crucified next to two criminals, died with. And the name Tres Hombres, I feel like has got it's a callback to the Trinity. Yeah. And then there's the final thing that, one of the final things that Carl says about John Russell, he says, so maybe you don't have to understand him, you just know him. And that is very much like a Bible passage from the book of John, where Jesus said, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. So I think there's a connection where he's saying, you could know this guy who sacrificed his life to save the rest of us. It all seems like very deliberate reading it with that eye, especially since, Elmore himself said it.
I would believe him. No, it's a really deep and it's a really rich book. Really fantastic questions being asked throughout amongst the people. And I think that the movie is worth seeing. I think it is good. And I think there's a lot of great moments and interesting conversations, but definitely read the book.
I think it kind of pales in comparison. I think Paul Newman is good in it. I think some of the survival stuff is good. I think it's pretty clunky though. I feel like it just feels really old timey in a way where I wish it was better. Which I love Hud, so I think Hud's one of the best movies. And
Diane Cilento is the actress who played Jessie. She seems to be acting in a little bit of a different movie than Paul Newman, but they still have some good chemistry.
I don't think the changes would have been bad. I see that they're trying to put in, like the women all kind of talk about their sex lives for a second, stuff like that isn't in the book that I'm like, this is fine. Sure. I think even the changing it around to give Russell a love interest, kind of makes sense or give it more attention. I just kind of don't think the movie was 100% successful. Even the cinematography, I'm like, I don't think it doesn't look bad, but I don't know. It's not like a gorgeous movie.
I wouldn't call it a gorgeous movie. There was one shot in particular where I believe we're looking over the gun sight of the rifle, and I'm not sure who has it at the time. It might be the young guy, Billy Lee, who's sort of the the film version of Carl, keeping an eye on Favor as he comes back. And in the background, we see coming around the bend Braden and his crew, or Grimes in the case of the movie, and his crew. And that was a really cool shot, I thought. But check out the movie.
There is a cool shot when they're in that shack too. That it clearly must have had like a set or the wall pulled out, because it's such a wide shot where you can see all 6 people in the shack. And it kind of called to mind like The Hateful Eight or something like that, where like you're in an interior space, but you've somehow pulled back to see 3 walls at the same time.
One of the things that really jumped out in the movie, and I had certainly been thinking about this in the book as well, there's, I think, a lot of similarities between John Russell and Carlos Webster from The Hot Kid. And the thing in the movie that just made me laugh out loud was the Grimes / Braden character tells Russell that he's got some hard bark on him, which is how Carlos's dad thinks of him after Carlos has killed somebody and hasn't overreacted as a young kid. But there's a lot of similarities. There's also how they...
Oh, I thought of you with the, the people got it wrong in the telling of the story. I was like, Judd's gonna love this. This is some hot kid stuff.
That's exactly it. That's so much of the hot kid is how people are portrayed in the press, and people starting to get the hang of playing with it.
And that pops up in Gunfights as well, but it's not. It's not used too many times in Elmore's 40+ books. So it is always cool when you see the echoes kind of show up.
Carlos, like John Russell, he's got Latin roots, Cuban in Carlos's case, Mexican in John Russell's case. They both have... Carlos is part Native American. John Russell lived with the Apache. So there's some really, really interesting similarities between them that I got a kick out of in the use of the newspaper. And yeah, that's something that jumped out.
I'm sure they wear their hat the same way. That's an Elmore classic.
And also the idea of... this is a recurring theme, and we did... we did Rum Punch, which is, sort of a semi-sequel to The Switch, where you have a wealthy husband who isn't sure if he wants his wife back. She's not worth the money. And, in The Switch, it's a ransom.
Look at that.
In this case, it's just, do you want to give us the money and you can have
I didn't
your
even
wife
think
back?
of that. That's great.
It comes up again. This has been... this is funny because this is the shortest book we've done, and this has definitely been our longest podcast so far. So there's just so much great stuff to talk about here.
I also went back really quick though. I did. I was curious. We mentioned that the book is in first person, so I went back to see if there were any other short stories that were written in first person. So we had 4 published Western short stories before Hombre that are in first person, that are pretty stylistically different. They, it's first person, but it's just like a guy telling a story, but there's one that's called The Kid. And it is from the perspective of a shopkeeper, but the kid in the story, well, it's basically a kid who was kidnapped and raised by Native Americans. And how he comes into contact with this small group of people. But I'm
this
like,
before
oh my God. Yes, it was from 56.
Oh, that's so cool. Alex, this has been a blast. Thank you for everybody for joining us on the Elmore Leonard podcast. We do want to hear from you, so reach out at hello@theelmoreleonardpodcast.com or visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com. Our next episode, where Alex and I will be getting into the books, we're going to cover Touch. So if you want to go read it, see it, enjoy it, savor it,
and watch the Paul Schrader movie.
Watch the Paul Schrader film.
And if there's a Schrader head out there who you want to hear 2 people talk about Touch, you come to the right place next episode. And if you have any suggestions, if you want us to do a different book, send us an email or, leave us a comment or a review. Yeah, we're down to do whatever.
No, this is we look at this as the beginning of a conversation with everybody out there. So thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to quote the man again. Until next time, Alex, take it easy.
Hey, Judd, why don't you shut the fuck up?
Okay, now this time it's uncalled for.
Okay, so.
The Elmore Leonard podcast is produced and edited by Judd Rubin. Music by Greg Ahee. Hosted by Judd Rubin and Alex Leonard. Executive produced by Peter Leonard. Copyright 2025, Elmore Leonard Inc. Please visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com or send us an email at hello@theelmoreleonardpodcast.com.